Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL football edition, week 8. As we're nearly at the midpoint of what has been a very interesting season to date across the National Football League. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, we're inching closer to Halloween. It's almost the end of October, and I still don't have a clue about half these teams in the league in the mushy middle.
Yeah, you're not supposed to say that, apparently.
I mean, it's transparency. It's a safe space around here, right?
There's certainly a lot of volatility, we'll call it, especially this week. A lot of injuries this week, a lot of things impacting the market more than usual, where matchups do matter. And we usually focus on them because that's a large part of how we locate our edge. But with some of these injuries, it's just going to be battles with price grabs in both directions from different factions. And heck, even the same bettors betting opposite sides of games just based on where the market's going to go, getting out ahead and then waiting till the very end to capture the best possible price in the other direction and having a little bit of a risk-free idea on some of these games. One we'll speak to in a little bit here with Bears and Commanders.
Yeah, normally looking for all the things to line up. It's the quantitative component, it's the matchup on the field, it's the situational spot. And when those things don't always align, you typically see the volatility that you referenced there. And you know what? Maybe a perfect segue into what we're going to see on Thursday night, where the Minnesota Vikings, fresh off of a narrow loss to the Detroit Lions, knocked from the ranks of the unbeaten, short week traveling across the country to take on the Los Angeles Rams, who slipped by the Las Vegas Raiders last weekend to the tune of 20-15. As we go through this particular football game, incest, probably the word that we've used all too frequently in a high level of familiarity. Sean McVay, the head coach of the Rams, Kevin O'Connell, his former offensive coordinator with Matthew Stafford under center that led them to the Super Bowl back in 2021. The Rams, meanwhile, they're limping into this particular game. The worst 6-game start at 2-4 under Coach McVay. Trade speculation and rumors swirling about Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp. But Sean McVay has had good success on short weeks. We'll see if he's able to continue that. And on the flip side, it's the Minnesota Vikings who come in with the second best point per game differential in the league this season. 6th most points per game, 6th fewest points per game allowed. Well balanced, at least on the surface. A group that hadn't trailed since week 1 against the Giants, trailed for more than half the game last week against the Detroit Lions. Give Kevin O'Connell credit, 25 wins with the Vikings. 20 of his 25 wins, though, during that span have come by one score, most by a head coach in his first 40 career games in NFL history. Payne, a lot of familiarity, a lot of questions, a bounce-back spot for the Vikings, the Rams benefiting by not having to travel, and this week not nearly as short for them, but we're not sure who may be on their roster when this game finishes into the wee hours of the morning on Friday.
What do you make of some of that trade news?
The Stafford stuff surprised me a little bit, but floating his name out there to the Vikings as a potential landing spot would make a world of sense, given the familiarity between him and Kevin O'Connell. I don't know if it's Sean McVay realizing that Stafford can't be his guy anymore because there's not a quarterback waiting in the wings, given what we've seen from Stetson Bennett and company, or providing a lifeline to Stafford, who is not going to win another Super Bowl with the Rams and maybe could be the missing link to get the Vikings across the finish line. Cooper Kupp, we've heard these trade rumors for a while, and that makes a world of sense. Go out there, get whatever draft capital you can. Puka has kind of asserted himself as a one, and quite frankly, you have a deep pool of receivers, even if they're not elite, and Tutu Atwell, Jordan Whittington, they're starting to come on, and who knows what Cooper Kupp's durability is going to allow him to accomplish the rest of this season and beyond.
So Cooper Kupp is 1,000% on the trade block. I know Veach kicked the tires there first before navigating to Hopkins, who they were quite familiar with, and looked like they were the leader in the clubhouse for initially until the Titans made an offer that was just so much greater than market. He elected to go to Tennessee, but Cooper Kupp certainly had the tires kicked on him. I think that one becomes maybe a touch more difficult based upon what the Rams are willing to absorb there contractually. The Stafford thing is interesting. Sunday night, I'd kind of just gotten something said to me in passing, and then it wasn't a confirmed source publicly saying it 36 to 48 hours later, but it's interesting to see. McVay usually has a good pulse on when to jump ship quick. He just spots it in the film. And so maybe there's something there that he sees that Stafford isn't capable of doing anymore. We'll see. Back to this game, we're kind of going on a tangent.
Well, he might just switch locker rooms. We'll find out before kickoff. Stafford goes and he suddenly comes out with a Vikings helmet on Thursday Night Football.
Bit extreme, but there's so many matchups in this game. It's tough to pinpoint just one. We did see the Vikings defense struggle last week against the Lions in their big rivalry game, and now you're traveling across the country on a short week, so it's not the optimal spot where the Rams were at home last week. They're coming off the bye the week before. The rest situation is certainly dramatically different. I think in terms of finding value past the situation, you got to think about what you're actually taking from the Lions-Vikings game. Is that a sign of things to come? Did the Vikings just reach their peak in market price and it was obvious it was going to come back to life? And I think there's probably something to the idea on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is Goff and Ben Johnson have just had an answer to Brian Flores' unique defense multiple times now because they have an O-line and a weapon combination nobody else in the NFL has. And so that just might be an anomaly against a specific team and not really the Vikings downtrending. I don't know if McVay and Stafford can solve the Flores defense in a similar fashion on a short week because I just don't think we're going to see massive change from Flores. Like he's just going to do what he does, I think. Rams' offensive line has to figure out how to handle the blitz as well. They're still down like 2.5 starters up front. Avila, Jonah Jackson, Noteboom. Matthew Stafford has been QB 32 out of 38 qualifiers against pressure this season. Now, Cooper Kupp is back. He's a receiver that can win quickly, and Stafford and him are usually on the same page. They know where each other are going to be looking and going to be on the field at virtually every single moment. Receivers that line up in the slot but freely move around the formation, which McVay does with Cooper Kupp, have given the Vikings trouble. If you think about St. Brown last week going 8 for 112 and Jaden Reed 7 for 139 for the Packers, and Diggs in the revenge game 10 for 94. Garrett Wilson, also a guy that gets moved around the formation, 13 for 101. So Kupp being back healthy is huge. He could have played last week, but McVay didn't want Kupp playing twice in 4 days. So I do think we see Cooper Kupp, at least, whatever his current version of healthy is. The Rams also need to get their run game going. Last week was also the first game of the season where the Vikings' run defense was gashed. Even with that performance, they're still number one on the season in schedule-adjusted run defense. Kyren has been great for fantasy owners because of volume accumulation, but he's been wildly inefficient. 44th out of 63 qualifying backs in elusiveness, just 2.7 yards per rush after first contact. Kyren has the 5th most carries among those 63 qualifying backs, but he's 33rd in explosive runs. So it's important that McVay gets Kyren going a little bit more. Hopefully he's more efficient, and then provide Stafford with some outs to the pressure looks he's going to see tonight. Something we've talked about, and it's worth mentioning again on the other side quickly here, Todd. I'm not as down on Sam Darnold's performance last week against the Lions, I think, as others are. He clearly has limitations. We know that. And it was the first time this season he was in a negative game state and couldn't rally the troops. So everyone's kind of swarming the gates and pointing and saying, hey, that's the Sam Darnold we know and love. I go back to what we discussed at the top of the season. Like, he's not the third quarterback in the first round taken overall. No one's expecting him to be that. But if you look last week, Darnold still finished QB1 in completion rate over expectation, finished QB 14 out of 35 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. So it wasn't as bad as it was made out to be. However, what's interesting about this matchup is the Rams defense lives in zone coverage. Darnold's splits, as we talked about, have been massive, significantly better against man than zone. Darius Williams is back at corner for the Rams. He's been a massive addition. So what we've seen in the market is pretty obvious relative to what we've heard and the players involved here. And it's, at 3.5, those weren't widely available and weren't long-lasting in the market, but those got gobbled up quite quickly on the Rams. And now at 3, it seems like there's been more than light dustings on the Rams plus 3 as well. I would envision others saying, hey, we aren't quite in love with 320 on the Rams. Maybe we let this thing settle at 2.5 and they suddenly become a teaser.
Yeah, we are starting, to your point, see some 2.5s kind of scattered out there right now. I won't say widely available, as a juice 3 is kind of the prevailing price tag total, and the game sits at 48. So we'll see what continues to transpire with game day. We did see a strong game day move on a side and total on Monday night that came to fruition with the Ravens game getting blasted over, and that game sailing past 70. You also saw Arizona actually close a pick'em after getting as high as 3, and they needed a little bit hooking by crook to get across the finish line with a narrow victory against the Chargers. So always worth paying attention to some of these game day moves as we talk about, especially in the standalone spots. As we head towards Sunday and we assess a divisional matchup between the Falcons and Bucs, injuries are the preeminent storyline that's worth discussing here. 4 of the last 5 meetings between these familiar foes have been decided by 6 points or fewer. We know they played earlier this year on a Thursday night, and it was the Falcons finding a way to outlast the Bucs with an overtime victory. But Payne, I'm not going to sit here and bury the lead and claim to break down some of the X's and O's. We've seen this price go from the Bucs minus 2.5 to the Falcons minus 2.5, trending towards 3, because there are cluster injuries for the Bucs wide receivers, and it's not of the depth variety. They're the 2 alphas in the room that Tampa has to try and replace. And it's 76 catches, 107 targets, 11 touchdowns, 900 plus receiving yards, 419 receptions over 3 seasons for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. It's the second most in the NFL over that span, behind just Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. We look at the other players on this Tampa roster, and Cade Otton's a nice piece. Jalen McMillan, they drafted and hold in high regards. Trey Palmer, the list goes on and on. But replacing 2 key cogs for a team that wants to lean into the passing game, yes, they've been able to run the ball more effectively in this spot, but against the Falcons, a team they're familiar with, how much does a downgrade look like, and is this adjustment in the market warranted for being down their top 2 wideouts?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head in that very much a difficult task talking about this game without, mentioning Mike Evans and Chris Godwin being out simultaneously, right? I mean, that's the lead. Baker Mayfield obviously has resurrected his career, but I don't think anyone mistakes him for being an elite quarterback. And so having an elite perimeter receiver in Mike Evans and an elite slot receiver in Chris Godwin elevates an average to an above average QB into a tier that has him playing metrically at a top 10 level, which Baker Mayfield was. The question here again becomes the market. Is it going to adjust too much? And maybe was it too little initially, right? I mean, Atlanta closed a 2.5-point favorite at home 3 weeks ago, 2.5-point favorite on the road now, so a 5-point adjustment. On the surface, that might feel extreme. The 5 is numerical points, right? The 5 isn't in value because we're moving through 0. I think we have the potential to get to 3 here, and that becomes the real conversation starter for professional bettors who are looking at Tampa. The recent data we have, right, C.J. Stroud without Nico has been ugly. Heck, I mean, the game we just talked about, Stafford and the Rams offense down both Puka and Kupp. I mean, with McVay
outgained last week
strings,
against
right?
the much maligned Raiders defense.
Right, and that's with McVay. And so it's been really just like an average to slightly below average unit. with those top weapons down. And it's not like this is your traditional Todd Bowles championship run Buccaneers defense. It's very much middling. I just wonder what this looks like on a short week for Liam Cohen. I mean, we just talked Monday night about the Buccaneers being one of the most pass-heavy early down offenses in the NFL. Are you going to be that without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin? I mean, Trey Palmer, Sterling Shepard, McMillan, this version of McMillan, right? The ceiling is certainly higher for him. He's only a rookie. But that trio isn't overly threatening. So it's on Liam Cohen to figure out how can we make enough change to overcome the injuries while throwing a curveball against Atlanta's defense and bring something different to the table that we brought 3 weeks ago, while also having your own guys being completely comfortable with what's being run, right? On 4 or 5 days, right? 6 days, you're not going to completely change the offense because now your guys have no clue what's going on.
Play all three running backs at the exact same time.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, even though you're joking, because it wouldn't be wise against a familiar division opponent you just faced 3 weeks ago and say, hey, we're going to run the same exact thing that led us astray last time, but we're going to also do it with far less capable players this time.
You can't come out there and try and repeat it with inferior talent.
So now the tough part is like, it's kind of how you want to attack Atlanta, though. They're 27th in schedule-adjusted pass efficiency. You still want to disguise things from 11, right? 3 wide sets, but it's very clear, to your point, that backfield of Bucky, White, and Tucker are the strength without Evans and Godwin, and they're all playing with their hair on fire, trying to earn more touches. I've never really seen this before, but it's like go earn your food type of shit going on in that backfield right now. And so I'm usually not a huge proponent for this, but Tampa has to limit possessions in this game. Atlanta is the second fastest team in the league in pace. They want to go tempo. Tampa has to keep this in a game state where they're not playing catch up with wide receivers 3, 4, and 5 trying to replicate elite ones. So I think that run game is important. We saw last week there's times where Liam Cohen will have Bucky on the field at running back. He'll have White lined up as what would have been a traditional fullback, but he's going out for passes. He was very effective as a pass catcher late in the game last week, getting him matched up on linebacker. So I think that is probably an avenue here, but Liam Cohen's definitely got to get creative on a short week, and that's going to be a tough task. But I think in terms of like getting back to entry points, if you're going and betting the Falcons -2.5, -20 right now, I'm not saying you can't win, but long term, you're like 5 points worse than the move. And I think, at 3 flat, you're probably going to see some buys on the Buccaneers. Again, we're talking here on a Thursday morning. I'm giving you like what we're hearing, what professional bettors are actually doing, not the end result on Monday morning, where it's much easier to be like, here, I laid 2.5 -25 on the Falcons and it won. It's a different conversation. So I think that's ultimately what's going to transpire in the market, is if this gets to 3, because it's probably unavoidable at this point. Buccaneers lost on Monday night. Everyone's going to talk about the injuries. Now, the Falcons did just get embarrassed at home last week. You'd probably like a little bit of a different outcome there in terms of this one here, but that's kind of what I'm hearing here is Buccaneers would take a bye. I don't know if it's going to be substantial, but if it gets to 3, it would be a bye there. If it never does, considerations for a teaser there.
For sure, and we've also seen the total tick down as well as a result, to your point, knowing that Tampa needs to play a little bit slower, try and play some keep away, knowing that the weaponry that they'll bring to the table in this matchup, a far cry from what they had when they had an opportunity earlier this year to knock off the Atlanta Falcons. If we're talking about injuries in that game to some of the skill position talents, we will no doubt be dominated in the discourse by the potential absence of your Rookie of the Year favorite, at least coming into this game in the next contest between the Chicago Bears and the Washington Commanders. As we sit here on Thursday morning, the 2.5s that are heavily juiced starting to turn into 3s with the Bears installed as a road favorite. Total in this game of 43.5. This could have been the second time quarterbacks drafted 1-2 both make the playoffs. I guess it still can happen if Caleb Williams leads the Bears into the postseason. Jaden Daniels does as well. But even if Daniels doesn't go, we're still going to have a matchup of former Heisman Trophy winners between Marcus Mariota and Caleb Williams. The Bears took care of the Commanders last year 40-20 on a Thursday night. DJ Moore went absolutely berserk. The Bears, so far this season, won 3 straight games following back-to-back losses. They've outscored their opponents 95-44, but you have to keep in mind strength of schedule. The Bears combined 0-4 versus teams currently with a 500 record or better. They're 9-0 versus teams currently below 500. So when you look at how things have gone there, the Bears have fared much better. Not 9-0. They don't have 9 wins. Don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But they've fared significantly better against some of the inferior teams on their schedule. They've played the easiest strength of schedule from a win-loss record so far this season and do have the toughest remaining strength of schedule on the horizon. They also have yet to play a divisional game, one of 2 teams in the league along with the Pittsburgh Steelers to have that distinction. On the flip side, for the Commanders, Payne, all signs point to us getting Marcus Mariota playing a full game against the Bears. He came in last week against Carolina once Daniels got hurt, did his job and then some, put together pretty efficient numbers, but clearly doesn't offer that same kind of upside or explosiveness as a runner that we've seen from Daniels. Again, rookie quarterback, limited sample size on one side. Has the market gone far enough to adjust for the potential absence of Daniels? And if we get to 3, would the Commanders, in your opinion, be of interest to professional bettors coming in on the home underdog?
So this was supposed to be the big afternoon game, right?
So I got flexed
to the afternoon.
2 big brands, 2 big quarterbacks, a lot of hope and optimism for 2 franchises.
Clearly, the conversation starters, Jaden Daniels and Marcus Mariota. And, we're recording Thursday morning. Market is indicating it's Mariota with the Bears, really about a 3-point road favorite right now. I have been told Friday will be the most telling day for Jaden. They're going to give him up until then. It's certainly going to be a pain tolerance thing. I would say, from what I have heard, there's a non-zero chance Jaden tries to gut this out. I get the vibe the organization is going to maybe reel him in a little bit and be a little bit more cautious. If he does play, there are going to be clear limitations. And I go back to September of 2022 when Justin Herbert suffered a similar injury against the Chiefs. The difference was he had 10 days because that injury came on a Thursday. So he had that mini bye. He gutted it out against the Jaguars, but it was like literally 60%. I think every professional bettor was running to the window there.
And once Herbert got upgraded, that thing went from 4 to 6.5 too.
Yeah. If it's Mariota, to your point, it's a little bit of a tougher ask. Yes, right, veteran quarterback, friendly offensive system. But the situation couldn't have been more favorable last week. That, Mariota faced the league's worst defense who didn't prepare for him while being spotted a double-digit lead. It's much different. Now, you have to monitor the injury report here for Chicago. Brisker and Gordon did not practice on Wednesday for the Bears. Eberflus says they're day-to-day. When you're coming off the bye, ideally you'd want at least a limited for some of those guys. Ideally for Chicago, both are out there, but this still is a massive step up in class for the entire Commanders offense, with the Bears having not just 2 weeks to prepare, but they're 7th in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency, 3rd in EPA per play allowed. The average rank of defense the Commanders have faced to date is 20th in efficiency, 24th in EPA per play allowed. And so it's likely Marcus Mariota at the same time a large increase in competition hits Washington in the face. The other thing here you're looking at is Caleb and Shane Waldron being able to build off the progress pre-bye during the bye. And so I'm sure more is getting added to Caleb's plate that has not been put on film. And sure, the schedule of defenses for the Bears during this offensive surge has been pretty poor. But the underlying change is pretty evident, right? Not just metrically, but there's been some fundamental change. Waldron's motion rates have soared. I mean, like up 20, 25, 30%. And so that helps a young quarterback better identify what's coming before the snap. There's still some injuries for Washington's defense that Carolina wasn't able to attack last week, but those are still present. Ultimately, though, as we kind of put a bow on this, it comes back down to price and information. Most of these games do, but when you get that information, what's the price? And that'll be the most important thing here. Inevitably, those that get news Jaden is out first are going to lay it below the key. Others will bide their time and come back on what they feel is an over-adjusted price. And the real winners will have both tickets in hand, right? Having got out on a cheap money line when this was Bears -1.5. And my feeling here is on the announcement, if Jaden is out, we're not only getting to 3, but we're going to exceed 3 would be my vibe here.
Yeah,
Todd.
figure we get through the key. And by the way, the stat that I butchered at the top basically said that neither of these teams has beaten a team with a winning record so far this season. The Bears and Commanders are combined 0-4 against teams with winning record. They're 9-0 against teams that are below 500. And you go through the resumes for these two teams, probably the most notable victory that we've seen from either of these sides is the Commanders knocking off the Bengals earlier this season. If I had to pick one resume-defining win. But to your point, the Bears have shown progress. Caleb Williams used his legs the last time we saw him as well against the Jags, and we'll figure out what Shane Waldron and company are able to dial up with an extra week to prepare. Unfortunately, the Commanders, they don't get their bye week till week 14, so if you put Jaden Daniels out there in harm's way again and this rib injury doesn't heal, suddenly a very promising season can go off the rails rather quickly, so you imagine they'll be judicious with his usage. You can
This hog can get 70 miles to the gallon. Way to redeem yourself there with that stat.
I mean, if we can get a Dumb and Dumber reference in on a Thursday morning, I mean, that's all that matters, and we've done the Lord's work in one capacity or another to be able to make it happen. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board podcast related. Be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And rate, review, subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast. Sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. We appreciate all your continued support as we have since day one. Bills, Seahawks, Payne out in the Pacific Northwest. Buffalo, a field goal favorite. Total in this game down a touch from where it opened in that 48.5 range. Now down to 47. This is a Bills team that has been on the road now. This will mark their 4th road game in 5 weeks. Seattle got a dominant road performance against the Atlanta Falcons, 3-point underdog, winning outright by multiple scores. Injury reports for the Bills: Terrell Bernard, Daquan Jones, Dawson Knox, Curtis Samuel, all DMP. The big injury, though, that we're monitoring for the Seattle Seahawks, DK Metcalf, expected to miss some time. The Seahawks have been mums on exactly the severity of that knee injury. Kenneth Walker missed practice on Wednesday with a sickness, expected to play. Leonard Williams sat out for rest. Nehemiah Pritchett and Trey Brown dinged up as well. But for the Seahawks, you did get a couple of guys officially listed on IR, getting a limited practice. We'll see if they're available this week. In George Fant and Abraham Lucas. Reek Woolen missed last week against the Falcons. All signs to point to him returning as long as there isn't a setback in the defensive backfield. Julian Love, Boya Mafe, and Jarek Reed also got in limiteds this week. Payne, these are two teams that are very interesting offensively. We've seen the Bills' philosophy center and be predicated on running the football whenever possible. James Cook looked like a shell of himself last week against the Tennessee Titans. It was Ray Davis showing a little bit more explosion out of the backfield despite having a diminished workload. Amari Cooper, less than 40% snap share in that game. Still made his impact felt, and you have to imagine that he's going to continue to contribute at a high level as things trend in a positive direction and open up a path for Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, and some of the other talented Bills receivers. Seahawks defensively, they benefited immensely from an Atlanta Falcons offensive line that was down 2 of their 5 starters by the time that game got deep into the second half. Seattle generated pressure up front, and it masked some of their deficiencies on the back end. Fascinating matchup because I don't think enough people are going to talk about this and what it means for two teams that have very different aspirations in their respective conferences. Seattle with a big home win here, able to continue to gain ground in the NFC West and stack wins. Meanwhile, for Buffalo, overwhelming favorites in the AFC East, but I don't think they're just focusing on a division crown. They want to do everything they can to try and keep pace with the Chiefs for that number 1 overall seed in the AFC.
So specific to market here, the first thing we saw in this game Sunday night and Monday morning was a buy on the under at 48.5 in anticipation that DK Metcalf would be out or severely hampered. The weather forecast at Lumen wasn't looking great either. It's improved some. As we record this Thursday morning, it looks like light rain with wind gusts up to 27 miles per hour, steady wind in the mid-teens. The other element here, and I think one of the biggest factors, it's actually the other side of the ball. It's the Bills' defense, to me, that's improving each week by getting healthier. Ed Oliver returned last week. Taylor Rapp missed a week with a concussion. Teron Johnson and Terrell Bernard have returned to help kind of solidify the middle of the field. Since A.J. Epinesa was called out by the staff, he's responded with 3 sacks the last 2 games, had his highest graded game of the season last week. The pressure is key here. 7th in pass rush win rate for the Bills defense. Seattle, 28th in pass block win rate. You mentioned the injuries to the right tackle position. Will Seattle get one of their right tackles back? Abraham Lucas and George Fant have had their 21-day windows open, so we have to monitor that. But I'm thinking about Seattle's offense coming off a picture-perfect environment where you're in a dome last week. There's no weather. It's against a Falcons front that can't spell pressure. Everything is different this week. It's outside. There's potential with weather, and the Bills do get pressure. If DK Metcalf can't go, and there is pressure, where do the Seahawks turn here? I mean, I just mentioned the Bills' defense getting healthier in the middle. Teron Johnson, one of the better slot corners. Terrell Bernard, one of the better coverage backers. And so if DK misses and Smith-Njigba has a tougher matchup than average, it's difficult to see Seattle's offense having great success and forcing the Bills to press on offense here. We also seen Seattle's defense get healthier up front the last few weeks along their defensive line. Made a trade, a swapping of linebackers for Ernest Jones, hopefully helping solidify the run defense a little bit more. Reek Woolen, let's monitor that situation. So I'm in agreement with that buy on the under, especially at 48.5. Now, you know, at 47, 46.5, it's kind of split in there. It might be no man's land until weather gets a little bit more situated. But that's kind of how I'm viewing this one. I think it's a much tougher matchup for the Seattle offense this week, and I'm not ready to get out there and lay it with the Bills. The side really hasn't been of interest to me this week. It was more so a little bit of a focusing on the total with a couple elements at play there.
The injury to DK Metcalf, when we speculate on all of it, is there anybody else on this Seahawks roster that you've seen even capable of replicating what he provides? No. I mean, Lockett and Jackson Smith and Jigba just don't feel like field spacers whatsoever.
So, Ryan Grubb, if you think about his offense over the years, especially last year at Washington, he's got that downfield threat, and there was a lot of optimism for DK filling that role this year. And we've seen him have some outbursts with Grubb not pushing the ball past the sticks enough at times. But you just look at DK Metcalf's composition. Not only does Seattle not have a guy,
there aren't
like
a lot
that,
of humans built
in the
way.
world, right? So, no, it's going to be extremely difficult to overcome. And then you think about where Smith-Njigba flourishes. It's the route running. It's being that man in the middle of the field. And so, you know, if this conversation was 2 or 3 weeks ago when Teron Armstead and Terrell Bernard were out for Buffalo.
Teron Johnson,
like,
not
okay.
Teron Armstead.
Or Teron Johnson. Suddenly you're like, okay, we feel a little bit better here if pressures come. We have a guy who can win and separate quick enough, and we can get him the ball before pressure potentially gets here. With Teron Johnson, that's not necessarily a favorable matchup right now. So,
one last thing.
It makes it difficult.
One last question I have on the Seahawks. I know we gave out in the newsletter the Seahawks win total over, and we're sitting in a spot where we're okay. It's not great right now. You'd love to be undefeated, but who wouldn't at this point?
Yeah, it'd be great to be 7-0 going over 7.5 win
I mean,
total.
look, I want to go glass half full. Defensively for this team, we haven't seen them have all of their pieces out there at the same time. Just given what you've...
Early in the season, we did. It just came against a questionable
That's what I was going to ask.
So
are you optimistic about what this defense can look like when they finally get healthy, or do you think it'll be too little too late? We've talked about complex schemes for Vic Fangio and some of the other higher profile defensive coordinators. I just wonder with the Seahawks, by the time they get the defensive backfield to be healthy, the time the defensive line and linebackers are all out there, will it be enough for them to gel as a cohesive unit and start to show flashes of the group we thought was flying a little bit under the radar before the season started?
So, very first thing at the beginning of the year, we were buying Seattle's defense. That was pretty well known, just because Mike McDonald's a guy that we truly respect. And he's improved every single defense, every single place he's been, and the defenses he leaves plummet. So it's very clear who is responsible for this. They added talent along the defensive line in the draft, free agency. They completely revamped their linebacker group. They're still doing it to this day. As they get healthier in the secondary, though, the question becomes is when they play the elite offenses. I think the question you posed is like, is Seattle's defense good? I think it is, right? I think it can be easily average to above average, which is a massive leap year over year. I think the big question is, can they become a defense that is extremely stout against the best offenses in the league? That I'm not 100% sure of. But for us to go over a win total that was of 7.5, just getting to the improved level was enough, right, while thinking the offense was going to make a leap with an offensive mind we really respected in Ryan Grubb, and he was going to be able to get those playmakers better involved. And I think the key here is, like, what does the offense look like if you can get that offensive line healthy? That's the other step to this. I think we're in a good spot, especially when you look around the landscape of their own division, where clearly things are going a little bit awry for San Francisco, something we kind of saw coming. There's talks about the Rams being sellers. Arizona, we expected that burst, and it just hasn't been there. I know the record, is 3-4 now, so it's like, hey, we're certainly on pace to eclipse last year's results, but the offense still looks a little bit clunky. It's actually regressed from where they were the final stretch with Kyler returning. So I think you actually have to feel pretty good here of where you're at if you're the Seattle Seahawks. Clearly dropping a home game to the Giants is the one that you'd love to have back. We'd certainly feel much better at 5-2 rather than 4-3, but I still think we're in good position. Now you go back to 500 here. Now we're battling a little bit, but I still think we're in a positive spot. You mentioned the game against the Giants, and schedule makers did them no favors in that spot, but still a chance to win. Seahawks, one of the worst spots of the season. Yeah, Seahawks. Right? Kind of knew that coming in because it's travel. Exactly. But at the same time, travel became hell. That's when you got decimated by the injuries. It's a combination of factors, and it creates the perfect storm of sorts for a team to go out there and lose as a touchdown favorite. I mean, you mentioned battles, by the way, at the top of the show, and no greater illustration of that this week than a game that I think, again, not many people are talking about because the win-loss records aren't what we expected for the Cincinnati Bengals at this point in the year, but a major game for them to try and get over the hump, knowing that they have a winnable game on deck against the Vegas Raiders next week in the wake of their performance against the Browns. It's the Bengals welcoming in the Philadelphia Eagles as a 2.5-point favorite. I'm going to call it 2.5 because if we check again in 30 seconds, it might be 2. It might be 2.5 minus 20. Lord only knows where this game's going to go. Total 48 painted across the board right now. This is an Eagles team that's undefeated this year when they have A.J. Brown on the field. They have wins over the Packers, Browns, and Giants, but the offense, Payne, has really lacked some of that big play potential. Last week against the Giants, it was the Saquon Barkley show running for 170-plus yards, but Jalen Hurts only attempts 14 passes. Devontae Smith has been a bit of an afterthought in the passing game. 1 catch last week for -2 yards, a grand total of 4 receptions over his last 2 games. And while a lot of people want to point to this Eagles defensive improvement, the biggest question that I'm left with is who has it come against? I mean, the Browns and the Giants don't exactly have vertical passing games, and we saw the Eagles struggle immensely trying to contend with Baker Mayfield and what Tampa can operate in space. They are getting better production out of a couple of Georgia players in Jalen Carter and Nakobe Dean. For the Bengals,
Yes, we've seen flashes. I'm sure they would have loved to finish the deal as we would have against the Baltimore Ravens and have that big resume-defining win on their schedule so far. They have a couple of elite pass catchers. We're seeing some of the depth pieces emerge, and the Bengals have finally come to their senses in terms of which running back provides a little bit more of a dynamic playmaking capability in Chase Brown over Zach Moss, as we've seen Moss's snap share now dip below 50%. Bengals, an injury to monitor, Geno Stone, left the game last week against the Browns on a cart. They're saying there's a chance he could play, and I'm sure you'd want all hands on deck defensively. But, Payne, I've seen this Bengals defense, when they're healthier along the defensive line, start to trend up. I know the schedule hasn't been great, but they've been significantly better in that department. And even against the Ravens, they were good against the run, did get gashed against the pass. Fascinating matchup for a variety of reasons, as I'll admit. I'm not sure I know exactly what these two teams are, and this would go a long way in terms of improving their overall body of work so far this season.
Like you, I have some suspicions about the Eagles' defense. Now, we truly respect Vic Fangio, and you mentioned some of the young guys on that Eagles defense that can certainly reach a new level we haven't seen yet, which in turn can improve the Eagles' defense as a unit. Since week 3, the Eagles are 8th in EPA per play if you don't account for schedule and situation, but you have to include the caveats, right? Week 3 was kind of the onset of that New Orleans offense getting hit with the injury bug, and Vic Fangio had great familiarity with the Kubiak system. Tampa absolutely destroyed the Eagles' defense week 4. Week 5 was the bye, and then it's back-to-back weeks, to your point, against Deshaun Watson and Daniel Jones. And I understand both Philly and Cincy have played the exact two teams in successive weeks, but this is a massive step up in class, against a Bengals offense that will likely be pushed some, and they haven't been the last few weeks. So you can look and say, hey, the Cincinnati offense might not be as great as you think it is. The Giants in Cleveland didn't really push their offense. So I think this version of the Bengals offense is going to look vastly different against Philly. Now, the Bengals defense in their own right is no great shakes. No. The one thing I do like seeing is the Bengals play more zone coverage than both the Browns and Giants. We've seen both Jalen Hurts and in turn A.J. Brown's numbers tick down against zone coverage. So you like kind of having that feather in your cap there. This is one of those games, to your point at the top, it's created a little bit of a battle in the market. Early in the week at 3, everyone's saying to themselves, nobody's power rating gets to Eagles +3 here. We were at, call it 2 as the consensus. There were some 1.5 out there. Now our consensus is 2.5. And you start thinking about matchups more, right? Eagles offense against zone, which we just discussed. Bengals defense certainly isn't great, but to your point, it's the healthiest it's been up front this season. Eagles offensive line still down Jordan Mailata. Mekhi Becton was a DNP on Wednesday with the concussion. Let's monitor that situation. We know Kelsey obviously retired, so like in a perfect world, you're down multiple starters here. The versatility of Philly's offense takes a hit without Dallas Goedert because suddenly we can't run the 2 tight end formations we love if we want to throw that curveball instead of going 3 wide. Goddard was also a DNP on Wednesday with the hamstring injury. Eagles defense being a touch overrated based upon the last 4 games while stepping up in class against the Bengals offense. And so interesting to see how low this potentially gets. My guess is now we've seen a stopping point that 1.5 juiced or 2 flat is kind of the stopping point, and there's a little bit of a difference of opinion here below the 3 on the Bengals.
And the 3s, to your point, didn't last at some of the sharper shops either earlier in the week.
No, they didn't. So it feels like, barring massive injury, we're kind of going to play this 2.5 game, and it's just the juice fluctuating on that number.
I hear those.
I'm a little interested to see what Philadelphia's offense is. I hinted at this on Monday. We anticipated this looking different because Kellen Moore was coming in. Was he the greatest offensive coordinator ever? No, but he was a massive upgrade. What we're seeing now, this is not the Kellen Moore offense. This is the Jalen Hurts offense. And to me, there's a little bit of a governor on the offense when you think about it in that manner. And so I'd probably be more gun to head, more Bengals than below the key than Eagles at the key if I was forced to do something. And it'll be interesting to see as we gain a little bit more knowledge on some of these injury situations.
One thing I will say about this game, if we're looking at trends that have emerged through a very limited sample size for two teams, Cincinnati would be best served to get out to a quick lead, knowing how slow Philly has started these games, force Philly to abandon the ground game a little bit earlier than they would like, and if you can make Jalen Hurts one-dimensional, to your point, we just haven't seen that dynamic passing attack in known situations yet from this Philly team at all throughout the course of the season. So maybe it'll eventually come. It's, again, a team that we created some exposure for ourselves and for listeners to win the NFC East. I have no problem with having that ticket in the portfolio. But in terms of Philadelphia's overall ceiling, do I think they're a legitimate Super Bowl contender as currently constructed? I wouldn't say that through the first 7 weeks of the season.
I would concur, unless we'll know here, right? If the defensive improvement is for real, suddenly the conversation changes.
For sure, and still questions about the head coaching
the vibe
spot.
It's not. Yeah.
So that can provide some...
we had questions before they hired him.
Well, we had those, and the fact that he was given another year after the way last season ended could be a different discussion for an entirely different podcast if things were to go off the rails for Philadelphia.
They did a good job miking him up and showing him in a different light this past week, and I think Philadelphia's social media team put out that conversation with him and Saquon, and so they're doing some PR with the old coach.
It helps. I mean, you and I joke about it all the time, being Yankee fans. If a PR agency can turn Alex Rodriguez from Public Enemy #1 into a cuddly teddy bear and a household hero, PR firms can do everything and then some to try and change the narrative, especially around professional athletes and some of these organizations. Philly is one team in the NFC East, Payne, who's still trying to figure out their identity. Dallas has had 2 weeks to do a little bit of soul searching after they were curb stomped by the Detroit Lions to the tune of 47-9. They head out to the West Coast to take on the San Francisco 49ers, who will look significantly different on the offensive side than what we've grown accustomed to. The Niners, a 4-point favorite in this game, total down from 48.5 where it opened on Sunday night to 46. The 49ers have won 3 straight meetings versus Dallas for the first time since the mid-90s. Dallas, as I alluded to, came in off of a disappointing effort, to say the least. It was the largest home loss since Jerry Jones has owned the team. The Cowboys, a unique dichotomy so far this season. 0-3 at home, 3-0 on the road. They're the first team to start 0-3 at home and go 3-0 on the road since the Patriots did it back in 2021. Defensively, allowing nearly 40 points per game in their own building and just 16.3 on the road. 49ers looking to bounce back in their own right, though. 28-18 last week against Kansas City, much to our chagrin. Brock Purdy wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination. Put his worst passer rating of his career in a single start on the books at 36.7. And we have typically seen this 49ers offense, when they don't have their full complement of weapons, not operate with ruthless efficiency or show some of that big play potential. So Kyle Shanahan will get tested this week. Dallas Cowboys injury concerns. Micah Parsons did not practice on Wednesday. I think you and I are sharing a brain that we think he's probably about 65-35 not to be available on Sunday. Going to want to continue to monitor that. And for the 49ers on the other side, they're extremely limited weaponry. Brandon Ayuk out for the season. George Kittle, DNP on Wednesday. Deebo Samuel was at the team facility, but suffering from pneumonia. I don't think he'll be out there headed into the bye. Payne, again, so many damn questions for two teams who, quite frankly, need this game like blood to get their seasons back on track.
We wouldn't usually talk about a matchup between a 500 team and a below 500 team, but it's Sunday Night Football. You got big brands, popular helmets. So here we are. And it is another big conversation about price because of all of the moving parts with injuries. And so to this point, we have seen buys on Dallas at 5.5, 5, 4.5. And I would say the consensus right now as we talk Thursday morning is 4. Having the conversation this morning with one specific group, they're like, boy, we would love to lay it if this gets to 3. And so that's really where we are with this game. Kyle Shanahan has owned the matchup. we have seen Mike McCarthy show vast improvement out of the bye, and so that's kind of a wash. I would assume Deron Bland goes. I think we talked pre-bye about Stephen Jones doing a hit and saying, I believe Deron Bland's going to be out there before the bye. He never was. Eric Kendricks is back, the green dot, so that would be big. Still no Lawrence. To your point on Parsons, I think is on the wrong side of questionable. So it leads you to think Brock Purdy should be more comfortable in the pocket this week. Dallas's secondary, if Deron Bland comes back, that'll be a big help because right now the Cowboys have allowed the largest amount of receiver separation in the entire league. Guys are just flocking wide open all over the place. Dallas, though, getting back to Brock Purdy under pressure, 26th in pass rush win rate, and that incorporates a lot of the Micah Parsons, Dexter Lawrence data. Brock Purdy was incompetent against pressure last week, a 0 passer rating, 15% turnover-worthy play rate, 28% adjusted accuracy. You would anticipate the pressure not being nearly as severe this week with Spags having 2 weeks to diagnose some things and come up with very savvy blitz concepts. There just aren't a lot of dudes up front if Dallas is still decimated there. Jordan Mason, I would think he's a large factor because Dallas has struggled mightily to stop the run. 25th in success rate against running back runs, 26th in efficiency, dead last in EPA per rush allowed for the Cowboys. So there are paths here, and Shanahan's offense has shown better against better Cowboys defenses recently. I think to your point, though, we have to monitor some of these situations, and ultimately that's going to determine the next move, right? Juwan Jennings. He was rolled out extremely quick last week. Then somehow everyone assumed he was going to be a go this week, didn't practice on Wednesday. He would be a huge get back. I mean, he's averaging 2.8 yards per route run this season. In terms of some of the efficiency metrics, it's basically like him and Nico Collins neck and neck. I don't think he's that good relative to Nico Collins, but it would be a huge get back for this offense.
Becomes the number one by default.
Right. Ricky Pearsall is a first-round draft pick. I think he's savvy. He got his feet wet last week. We saw the usage rate. We saw the target rate increase. Now it's game 2. I would expect a little bit of a better look there. Cowing is a kid that we've been bullish on at the college level. I got a note from my San Francisco guy this offseason. I'm like, boy, they really like Jacob Cowing. And we saw the 40-yard explosive last week. Now you're in a little bit of a different role where more is going to be asked of you, but you can at least prepare for it. Debo has pneumonia. Apparently he was around the team Sunday. Yesterday, Matt Bowers of The Athletic, who covers the Niners every single day, said Debo was in the locker room shooting hoops. So I don't know what's going on with Debo. I mean, the last time I heard anyone with pneumonia, I joked around with you as I was playing Oregon Trail in middle school. My entire family.
We also did say Debo had sniffles. People crush us for that, but if he's back shooting hoops on Wednesday, 2 days later, I mean,
isn't pneumonia like highly contagious?
It can be. I mean, you and I don't claim to be infectious disease doctors, even if we try and play them on TV. But yes, pneumonia can be very contagious if you're coughing and touching communal surfaces. So if you're the 49ers and it's a serious bout of pneumonia that kept you sidelined on Sunday, I'm not sure why they would run to have him back in the team facility around everybody else.
So, like, I don't know what's going on in that situation.
I sent a note as well, so hopefully I get a little feedback as well in terms of what actually is going on.
Matt Bowers is one of the most respected guys covering the 49ers. So if he says Debo was in the locker room on Wednesday shooting hoops, I would assume that would be accurate. So, again, some of these injuries, the availabilities will determine the next move. And then once you have that settlement of, hey, this is exactly who's going to be out there, then we start assessing price. And so if there's a situation where Kittle is up, Juwan Jennings is up, and then you're sprinkling in Pearsall and Cowing, and this is at 3, I think the group that I spoke with probably has an opinion there on the 49ers. So a little bit of a moving part. The total, obviously, we've seen get crushed under based upon some of these injuries. Now at 45.5, it becomes a completely different assessment, similar to the side and who's available. So we discussed it because everyone wants to hear Cowboys 49ers talk based upon the brands and the
time slot.
The history, yeah. But, well, I mean, it's been a rivalry over the years. So.
Well, it hasn't been much of a rivalry for Cowboys fans. They've gotten their hearts ripped out of their chests on a number of occasions. Before we close the book on that game, Dallas's offense overall, I mean, this is a group we had questions on coming in.
They don't separate.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wonky offense that we talked about as part of the reason we were sellers. Like, one, we thought the defense would take a tick down. At the same time, the defense was learning a completely polar opposite scheme. And then offensively, they didn't really do anything to help Dak Prescott. And so if you can focus your attention towards CeeDee Lamb, what else is there? Now, Ferguson should be 100% healthy. I like him as a tight end. Can you get Tolbert to step up? But what we have seen, and the data has been pretty evident, and now we have really great new tracking data that's out there, and it's like recording separation for every single receiver, and then you're putting it into a team context. And the Cowboys offense right now with that receiver group that didn't improve in the offseason by any additions is dead last in the NFL in separation. And so for as much as we love to hate Dak, is he like the most elite quarterback ever? No. Does he kind of pee down his leg in big moments? Yes, but he's not really being provided a ton of help. So you have Dak Prescott throwing into these really tight windows, and it's led to some turnovers there. The ground game has no punch, which is what we expected when you go into the season with a Dowdle-Zeke combination. Right?
Not an elite tandem of backs.
And so that's really what you're looking at, is there's not much pop from the ground game, and there's not much separation from the receivers, and here we are. Maybe Mike McCarthy identified something out of the bye. We'll see. Now, certainly San Francisco's defense is down a tick from last season. But that's kind of the overarching sentiments. And listen, we faded both these teams in the offseason. So
yeah, neither one of us
are. Both are underachieving. Let's hope this fucking game ends in a tie. Can that happen in 2024?
It can. We can. Okay. We just need 70 minutes. We need 70 minutes and end this game in a tie and put one in the win column, the proverbial win column, for both win totals under. Unfortunately for Cowboys fans that are hoping for a light at the end of the tunnel, schedule does not get any easier over the next handful of weeks. At the Niners, at the Falcons, home against the Eagles, which a series they've dominated based on home field advantage. Home against the Texans on Monday Night Football, and at the Commanders. So the next 5 weeks will go a long, long way in determining what the Cowboys can accomplish this year. And Jarrett hasn't shied away from saying that they're not going to trade for anybody to bolster their roster. So we'll see how things go. As you'd expect, a much more inspired effort from Dallas coming out of the bye, knowing that they were embarrassed by the Lions, but will inspired be enough to get the win against a 49ers team looking to bounce back. You can follow Payne on social media, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things podcast related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, I know we have deliberated back and forth, both pre-show and during the show, figuring out exactly where we wanted to go with our best bet, but I have a slight inkling. It's time for you to shed a little light on it for our listeners.
So, one thing that we've, at least from my perspective, felt like we don't hide from anything, and has not been the start of the season that we would have liked and anticipated. And we don't need to go down the list of what's transpired. We've not had the most fortune. This would have been a much easier task 24 hours ago, for sure, because the price was a little bit different. But I think the other thing here that's important to note is, like, everyone's just looking for bets, right? Bets. The other part of this equation is the fiscal side, right? Managing money, knowing when to press, knowing when to kind of dial it back with both bet size and volume. So we like Miami. So rotation number 272, Miami Dolphins. We'll call it 3.5 minus 0.5. There is 320 out there at a few spots, 325. If you want to split the bet between the two, fine. But for grading purposes, right, we'll give ourselves the worst of the possible number here.
Asian handicap style in the NFL.
Right. So, maybe that's something to consider. But for me, just looking at this and saying, hey, what was our power number on this game pre-Tua injury versus what it is now, we would have had Miami -6 here. Now, I think there's a difference of opinion on what version of Tua you are going to get, and I think that's fair. He has not seen live bullets in 4 weeks, there's probably going to be a little bit of an acclimation phase to those live bullets. Now, you have injury doctors also that came out. Deepak is a guy that we've had on this show. He doesn't think there's any regression there for Tua. He's just going to hit the ground running. What I would say, in at least his defense of that was, or is, and again, we're getting into some territory that might make some people uncomfortable, going to IR was very much cosmetics. If it was Tua's choice, he would have been back much earlier. He was chomping at the bit to get back. The very next game against Seattle, where you're thinking, hey, we have brain trauma, let's not hop on a 6-hour flight across like he wanted to be with his team in Seattle and was on the sideline, right? So this isn't your traditional quarterback gets injured, quarterback's dealing with concussion. Let's look at the data the very next week. He's had 4 weeks off, and of which he's felt he hasn't needed all 4 weeks. So that is a little bit interesting here. And now in terms of like the actual matchup, you have an Arizona team that I think record-wise 3-4, but metrically a little disappointing. Defensively, they don't get after the quarterback, and their top pass rusher was lost on Monday night. You can run on Arizona. We saw that game plan a week ago where Miami had great success on the ground. Hopefully their running backs don't fumble the ball all over the place this week. Defensively, we're seeing a unit that's been really aggressive, and it stuns me to say this, but go back to another conversation where Kyler Murray in his time, for whatever reason, as mobile as he is, has not fared as well against man-cover defenses and defenses that apply a lot of pressure. And that's what Miami does here with Weaver. So, like the matchups, like the price, certainly there is a little bit of a wider spectrum of potential outcomes because of Tua having this 4-week layoff. But I think the matchup and the price kind of combat that a little bit here. Arizona with a little bit of a fraudulent win on Monday. Miami with their season on the line. And the other thing that Tua's stepping into here, Todd, is the offense is a little bit healthier, right? I mean, you got all the running backs back. The wide receivers are there. OBJ's even there, right?
Jonnu Smith contributing for the first time.
Right. And so there's a lot of weapons. I think it's very difficult to price Miami, right? Because how they've looked the last couple weeks. And I've kind of banged the table. Is Tua like a great quarterback? Is he an elite quarterback? No, he's not elite. But I think it's fair to say he's average to above average. But this system, where you have to throw with timing and anticipation and be accurate, he's kind of the perfect fit quarterback for that. And we talked about Huntley and like how is this guy a fit? And so the power rating could never match up because you're getting a power rating on Miami where it's factoring in the Waddles and the Tyreeks, but you can't get those fucking guys the ball. So it's like it's actually worse. It's like, what would the power rating be if those guys weren't on the team and you have Tyler Huntley? That's kind of how it should have been gauged because Huntley couldn't get him the ball. Now you have someone who can actually disperse the ball to these gentlemen. And so price matchup, here we are. And if you guys want to get exotic, again, for our purposes, we'll grade it at minus 305, 3.5 minus 05. If you want to do a split there, probably makes some sense as well. I kind of get the vibe here. We may be
headed north.
Maybe a touch on the move. Yeah, it's kind
Javon Holland also should hopefully be out there as well. I know.
I think he's out there.
He got the limited on Wednesday. They erred on the side of caution with the hand injury, but I think you highlighted one of the key issues as well. People saw Arizona win the game 17-15 against the Chargers, but for those of us who grade out games, it wasn't a win. On the stat sheet, a couple of properly timed turnovers that fundamentally impacted the game, and it was still a Chargers team with a limited pop gun offense in terms of passing capabilities that threw for 336 yards. Justin Herbert had a field day, and the Chargers still averaged 6.2 yards per play in a win. You have to imagine Miami is a good buy low spot. To your point, all of the weapons healthy. We know Tua can be the consummate pivot and is a good opportunity against a defense that wasn't good to begin with, that's extremely banged up in the form of Arizona, now traveling across the country on a short week playing in heat and humidity.
Love it. Let's get off the schneid here.
Let's do it. The Dolphins break the losing streak to kick off the campaign. Still plenty of time to turn things around, one victory at a time. Anything else, Payne, you want to share with our listeners before we take a little break and rejoin everyone on Monday morning?
Okay, I heard the first part of the sentence. I got excited, and then the second part came Monday. Okay, I will see you
Well, that
Monday.
still is a break. It's just not a break as long as you'd like, unfortunately. For Payne Insider, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck with all of your NFL Week 8 investments. And with a Dolphins ticket in that portfolio on Sunday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.